Yeah, I'm new to this technology. And then I was also looking at our folks on Zoom. So I put a I'm trying to remember the name of the gizmo, but it's an iPad. I put an iPad on the lectern so that I can actually see people who are here. Right now, I'm only seeing me. So we'll work on how I can see people. But the idea is that at the end of the talk, those of you who are on Zoom, I'm going to put in the handy headset that I have here so that I can actually hear your questions. Then I realized I'm still going to have to repeat them to all of you. So we're still working on how to do this. But anyhow, once again, good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you here. It's really a lovely morning. It's so nice to be out. So I hope that those of you, wherever you are around the world, you're also experiencing a lovely morning as well. So this morning, I want to give a talk that I've titled, Get Real. And in my talk, I'm going to be talking about a koan. And it's a koan are teaching stories in Zen. They often, for people who are just approaching this teaching, they can be rather baffling. And even for people who've been doing this for a while, they can be rather baffling. That's not really what their point is. They really are teachings that point directly to reality. And so I thought I would talk about this koan. The koan I'm going to talk about is a celebrated koan. It's one that we've heard here at Dharma Field, and it's one that, if you were to Google it, plenty of people refer to it. So you're going to recognize this koan. But there's a reason why I wanted to talk about this particular koan this morning. And that is because of just, I guess, the way things are going. Let's just put it that way. The way things seem to be unfolding. And it's all kinds of ways, but I can tell you right now, some of it is just conversations that I have found myself embroiled in, especially recently, but I by no means mean to say that this is just a recent phenomenon. I'm just saying that some conversations I've been a part of within the last few months really bring back to me what it is I think that this koan is pointing out to us, and where it is that we often are confused and get stuck, and how I see that just in the way that we interact with one another, the way that we talk about one another, the way that then we act in the world. And I am not by any means trying to just cast this out on other people. So I'm part of these conversations. And I will sometimes, unfortunately, after it's come out of my mouth, realize what it is I'm doing. And sometimes maybe after the conversation has ended and I have to contact the person I was communicating with and apologize, or turn around to somebody else I know and complain about the conversation I just had, right? So this is something that's very important. And to be honest, as I started writing this, I went, I think I've talked about this repeatedly now over the last year. So if I sound a bit like a broken record, I do apologize. But this really, really is important. This really is something that we all get caught up in. And this really is something that the teachings point to how it is we're getting caught up. And really, they point to a way that we cannot get caught up in this, or at least that when we get caught up, perhaps we don't get quite as entangled, quite as embroiled. Because as you can imagine in these conversations I've been having, and you can imagine what kinds of conversations they've been, I've just been encountering this attitude, and again, I'm part of that, of the certainty of our understanding of how things are going. Just the absolute certainty of what it is that's going on. And when we're this certain, then we start telling people, based on this certainty, this is what you have to do. These are the things. I could even maybe come up with a list of things. These are the things that you have to do, period. And if you don't do them, end of conversation. You know, they can get to that degree. They don't always end up in that place. Sometimes they're just stuck in the argument, the debate itself. And what's happening often in these conversations, as again, I've talked about over the last year, what's happening in the conversations, what's happening in the ways that we then go out, move about in the world and act out of our beliefs is we're just getting fixated on, we're getting stuck on particular things, this one aspect of reality, of how the world is showing up. We really get stuck on it. Fixated is not a bad idea, you know. First we have this idea, and then we get stuck on it. And so that's actually, again, just what I've been noticing, again, in myself and just stuff that I see going on. So I thought of this koan, and the koan actually comes to mind to me often. And like I said, you're going to recognize it. I had always thought the title of the koan was Sun-Faced Buddha, Moon-Faced Buddha. And I say that you probably already know, many of you, what it is. I'll be telling. But when I opened up Blue Cliff Record, I was reminded that at least in Thomas Cleary's translation in that volume, it's titled Master Ma is Unwell, and Ma is Matsu or Baso. I'm going to call him Baso because Baso is how we talk about him here at Dharma Field. That's his Japanese, the Japanese version of his name. So I'm going to read to you the koan, and then I'll just talk to you about what it is that I'm seeing in the koan that I think, again, first of all, what it is it's pointing to and how I think it speaks to the stuff that I was talking about. The great Master Baso was unwell. The temple superintendent asked him, "Teacher, how has your venerable health been in recent days?" The great master said, "Sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha." And that's the koan. And sometimes koans do that. Often they do. You're kind of expecting it to keep going and it stops. So again, I'll just read it. It's very short. Great Master Baso was unwell. The temple superintendent asked him, "Teacher, how has your venerable health been in recent days?" The great master said, "Sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha." So before I start talking about what it is that the koan is pointing to, I just wanted to remind you who Baso is. Many of you may know, some of you may not know, and he's an interesting person. He's a very important figure in Zen. He lived from 709 to 788. That's part of the golden age of Zen, one of the great masters of that time. His Chinese name, as I pointed out before, is Matsu Daoyi. And like I said, he was a very important master. Why? Well, he had a lot of great students. First of all, he had a great teacher. His teacher is Nangaku, and I'll bring Nangaku up in a moment. And Nangaku was the Dharma heir of Huineng. And Huineng is a very pivotal figure, again, in Zen. And I realized as I was starting to write down, well, you know, he studied with this person, and then that person studied with that person. You can say that. You start to realize that it becomes hard to separate this. Another teaching of Buddhism, right, that everything is interconnected. Our usual instinct is to break everything out, separate things. But when you do something like, well, what makes Baso great? And you start looking at the lineage that he's in, you start to realize you can just keep going back and going back. And then he was a teacher of a number of great Zen masters themselves. And there are three whose names I recognized: Baizhang, Nansen, and Fa Chang. And Fa Chang is probably the name we know the least here. But he was the teacher of those great masters and others as well. So he was very important just in the number of Dharma heirs he produced and how, you know, how profound their understanding was. He also really shaped the way Zen was taught He was a very important figure in that type of Zen teaching that has shouts in it, ha! Or ho, whatever the shout is, of answering silently with a whisk. Maybe you just gesture. You've never seen those whisks that they shoo flies away with. So gesturing with that. The answer would just be silence and a gesture, or hitting students to bring them to reality, either with his hand, fist, or with a staff. Boom, right there, right back. Pinching their noses. There's a story I really like. I'll just really quickly run through this. We won't explain it, but I really like the story. So Baso was once with his student Bai Zhang, and they were walking together, and they saw some wild ducks fly past. And Baso asked, "What is that?" Bai Zhang said, "Wild ducks." Baso said, "Where have they gone?" Bai Zhang said, "They've flown away." The great master then twisted Bai Zhang's nose. Bai Zhang cried out in pain, and Baso said, "When have they ever flown away?" Right, so that kind of thing. That's his teaching. He might pose questions that seem paradoxical to his students, or when they ask him questions, give paradoxical answers. I think all of that we can understand. It's almost like a pop cultural version of what is Zen? Well, Zen is ha! It's saying peculiar, paradoxical things. It's a teacher whacking a student. It's all that. So Baso, that was his teaching technique. We also know Baso, and here's where Nangaku, his teacher, comes in, from a koan that we teach here at Dharma Field often. And again, it's a pretty celebrated koan. And that one is, this one, Nangaku polishes a tile. So Baso was Nangaku's student. Baso was a very diligent student, and he practiced Zazen day and night. And Nangaku could sense in Baso that there was great understanding, or the potential for great understanding here. So he sat down next to Baso once when he was sitting meditation, and he asked him, he said, "Great monastic," that's in the translation, I just love that. So teacher speaking, master speaking to a student, he calls the student great monastic. He goes, "Great monastic, what do you intend by doing Zazen, by doing that sitting meditation?" Baso says, "I'm intending to be Buddha." Nangaku then picks up a tile and starts polishing it. And Baso says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm trying to make a mirror." And Baso says, "How can you make a mirror by polishing a tile?" Nangaku asks, "How can you become a Buddha by doing Zazen?" So we know that story. That's a story of Baso when he was a young practitioner. So Baso, when he's young, the beginning of his practice. Moon-faced or sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha, we encounter Baso toward the end of his career. He has been the great master, and he has had these amazing Dharma errors. Now he's I don't know if he's frail, but he's an old man, prone to sickness. This is where we are in the koan. And we're told right up front, right at the beginning of the koan, that Baso is unwell. Again, that's really the title of the koan. So the temple superintendent asked him, "Teacher, how has your venerable health been in recent days?" So the temple superintendent's concerned. There's this great Zen master. He's elderly now, prone to sickness. He's been unwell recently. So he just says, "How has your venerable health been in recent days?" The temple superintendent is expressing what we would normally refer to as compassion. And I just chucked air quotes around compassion, not because what the temple superintendent asked wasn't compassionate, nor am I saying that it was compassion. I'm just saying that that's the kind of activity we think of as compassionate. In Buddhism, when we refer to compassion, we don't necessarily refer to that. In Buddhism, when compassion is referred to, we're talking about understanding that's rooted in wisdom. So compassion is rooted in wisdom. Again, what we usually call compassion isn't necessarily that at all. It might be a particular act that we see as a compassionate act. Or maybe there are acts that we don't see as compassionate acts, like twisting a student's nose. We might think, well, that wasn't very compassionate. And yet, Basso could see that was exactly what compassion required to help wake that student up, because his action was rooted in wisdom. He wasn't twisting the student's nose because he's cruel. He wasn't doing it because he was like, you got the answer wrong. You know, he was doing it to bring the student back to reality, which doesn't mean that we should now all start going around pinching people or twisting their noses or hitting them or whatever, because that's, again, getting back to this idea that there are certain acts that are wise and certain acts that aren't wise. And that is the problem that I'm trying to point to today. This is the problem that we frequently operate out of. We operate out of a world of particularity. Now, granted, the world shows up that way. There's stuff, there are particular things that are showing up. There are things, these things, they come and go. And that coming and going can cause us some great consternation. Because there are some things that come that we just don't want them to come. I don't know about you, but when I heard about the fire that was starting to rage in northern Minnesota, I didn't want that to come. You know, there are things that come that we don't want to come, and things that we want that go. There are things that come that we want to come. And sort of built into that, you can see its nature is that it will go, and we don't want it to go. So we can see that in this world of things, as we get caught up in it, very easy to suffer, to feel the edges of that. And this is a world of edges, this aspect of reality that we get caught up in, this world of things. Things have to have edges. They have limits to them. That's their nature as things. They wouldn't be things if they were limitless. You wouldn't be able to, I don't even identify it. So they have limits, they have edges. Our subjectivity is like that. Who we are, what we see, and what we understand intellectually, that is by its nature limited. And you can see that just by looking. Right now, you probably can only see, that far and that far. I don't know how far that is for you. For me, with my glasses on, it's not so bad. If I take my glasses off, it's not so good. But you can see that far. And you can know things. And that too is limited. How do you know things? How do you know things? This is a great question. We know things in a variety of ways. And by knowing, I'm just right now talking about intellectually knowing, the way we understand knowing, to go, I got it. Or I have the facts at my fingertips. And how do we know things? Where are we getting those things from? By its nature, what we know in that way, and what we see in the way I was just showing you, by its nature, it's limited. Again, that's where we get caught up. We might understand it's limited, but we don't act as if we understand it's limited. We have the facts. I'll talk about facts in a little bit again here. We understand what's going on. So I know the truth, and this is the way it is. This is the truth. And then it's really startling when you encounter somebody who, and this is something I think we see much more of than I remember seeing before. You have somebody who just seems to live on another planet. And they just tell you, well, no, that's not what's really going on. What's really going on is this. And the facts that you have, well, that's just what everybody believes. I got the facts, It's really interesting to watch this. And like I said, I've been caught up in conversations where there's each side, and I'm just sort of like, okay. I've heard some really crazy stuff in the last year, at least to me. Again, I'm going from my perspective. Stuff that really I just never would have imagined. So there we are. We're in this world. We have our beliefs. We have our sense about this is what's right. I got my facts. And that's where we get caught up. We don't realize the limits of those facts. We don't realize the limits of our perspectives. We understand what we have possession of is the truth. And now we're going to go out into the world and we're going to make other people subscribe to that truth. Now, the thing about facts, as I was pointing out, those facts that we bring in, and the thing about truth is that here's the deal. Some people say, well, my ideas are better than yours because they're rooted in facts, and there may be some truth to that. But one thing that we have to keep in mind, rather than to go there, whose truth is better than whose other's truth? Which truth is better? Which truth is based on the real facts? What we really have to realize, and this is hard, I think, for people to hear, because when they hear this, they really get some ideas. And that is that facts and truth are socially constructed. What we call facts, what we call truth. So again, I'm just talking about the way we're getting caught up, the way we're operating in this world, they're socially constructed. We have an agreement about how it is that we determine that there are truths or facts. That doesn't mean that there aren't any truths or facts per se. That's where we want to go then. Oh, you're saying there are no truths or facts, everything's socially constructed, whatever goes. Not saying that at all. It just means truths and facts are socially constructed, and we have to recognize that. That's what we don't do. We think, no, this is the truth. These are the facts, without really thinking about what that means. So we don't have to throw it all away, but we do have to be careful. Because, in this world, we have to make particular decisions. That's the nature of the reality that we're in, the reality that shows up this way. We have to make particular decisions, and we probably then have to turn to ideas and to facts in order to support what it is we're doing. We don't always do that, but we may, and that's okay. But again, just be aware of the limits of those facts and truths. I was actually going to say, because what we do again is we subscribe to my truths are better than your truths. I have the facts. You don't have the facts. You just have a belief system. I got the actual facts. When I was writing this talk, I almost put down, we got to stop doing this. Because this is the thing that I do and that I hear other people doing all the time, and I realize it's insanity. To use a phrase that Steve likes to use, it's insanity. It really is. And I thought, we have to stop doing this. And as I wrote it, I thought, well, that's not exactly right. That's actually a common misconception. And it's a common misconception, particularly about Buddhist teachings. And that is, we hear the Buddhist teachings, and then we think that the teachings are telling us what to do and what not to do. And then we should apply that to our lives. So, okay, I've heard the Buddhist teaching, right? So I'm saying my instinct was, we have to stop doing this where we say, my truth is based on truer things than your truth is, that we have to stop doing this. And that's, again, part of the problem. And we think when we encounter these teachings that they're telling us, I shouldn't do that. So just an example, we'll be reciting the Bodhisattva vows after this talk. And one of them is to be released from desires. And this is, I know, a sticking point for some people. They're like, oh, how can you live without desires? What does that even mean? Which, of course, is not at all what the teaching's pointing out. In fact, the way it's worded in our chant book, to be released from desire, I don't hear a denial of desire in any way whatsoever. But people will hear this, oh, I'm not supposed to desire. Or maybe I can make it a little less strong, because people would find that pretty hard. But I shouldn't have preferences. Or no judgment. There's a teaching of non-judgment. I shouldn't judge. So you encounter that teaching and then you go, okay, so in my life, no preferences. I'm going to really try not to prefer something. I'm going to try not to judge. That's our usual way of doing things. And there's, to be honest, not necessarily anything wrong with that. If you want to just pause for a moment when you're in the middle of judging somebody and go, you know what, I'm not going to do that right now. That's fine. But that's not what these teachings are. That's not how these teachings work. That is our business as usual. And ultimately, you'll get tripped up in that. Ultimately, you'll get to another impasse like the one I'm talking about. Because maybe you'll start saying, judging is wrong. Maybe that's the way you see things. Judgment is wrong. So maybe you start interceding when you see others judging. And you tell them, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. You're judging. Judging is wrong. We practice non-judgment in Buddhism. And there you are, back to the problem that I'm seeing. The problem that Basso sees, that he points to in his answer. So what the teachings actually do, rather than tell you, don't judge anymore, don't have any preferences, they actually just point us back to reality. Reality doesn't judge. You ever think about that? You ever watch a leaf fall and ask yourself how much judgment is going on there? Or when like a stream of water hits something that gets in its way, it just moves around it. Is it judging the impediment, or is it just moving around the impediment? So the teachings point to reality. That's it. They just direct us back to reality. In true nature, there is no desire. When we realize true nature, desire is rooted in something I don't have. It's rooted in something else. When we realize true nature, we see that there is nothing else, that this is it. When desires do arise, we can see them for what they actually are. And that's the thing, desires arise all the time. Is there anything wrong with that? Well, no. You have preferences? Is there anything wrong with that? Well, no, there's nothing wrong with it. But we can get ourselves into trouble when we've got these preferences and we attach to them. I used to, when I was a young man, I know I've talked about this before, and I still have a little bit of this, still lingers. I act as if just faint traces of it linger. There's a little more than faint traces. But I used to think, as a person who was really interested in art and cinema, that my taste in movies, they were the good movies. The other movies were the bad movies. I mean, I know I used to get people really angry. Heck, I remember in high school getting kicked out of a car. We were driving back from the movie theater, and I was like letting people know what had actually occurred there as we were watching that movie. And if you want to know, I actually remember what movie it was. It was the animated movie Heavy Metal. So hardly a movie that was even worth any kind of serious interaction. And my friends all got so mad at me, they kicked me out of the car and I had to walk home. And I was miles away from home. It took me almost 2 hours to get home at night. I deserved it, right? But that's it, so my preferences, where we start to get tripped up is when we think our preferences are better than others. So getting back then to the temple superintendent's question, where he asks him how he has been, how the great master is venerable, health has been recently. And it's not that he's getting anything wrong by asking that. It's just that he's not getting at the truth of what's showing up. He's just remaining at the level of surfaces, this world of things that come and go, like the master's health, that we get caught up in. And again, all kinds of things, anything that shows up is like this, that we get caught up in. So he just doesn't quite get at what's showing up. And again, that's where our discourse where our action tends to remain. And we can be pretty adamant about it. In fact, we can be pretty, really, 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 really adamant about it. It's where our actions remain in this world of appearances. And when we act out of that world of appearances, all we're doing is we're stirring up the muddy waters, to use a conventional image. We're just creating more fragmentary views, more fragmentary ways of being. So when Baso is asked this question, how his health has been, his answer, especially when you don't know this koan, his answer is kind of surprising. Because, I mean, we know it's a koan, it's a teaching. So we know this probably could be, how's your health? No, I'm doing all right. How is yours? Because that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is Baso says something. The reason this is recorded is he's saying something that's not that. That's not the usual exchange. That's actually an expression of an understanding of reality. So he says, sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha. And what does that mean? Well, Buddha, of course, is the nature of reality. That is the nature of reality. Moon face is referring to that aspect of reality that changes. So you think about a moon, and it goes through these phases, and it seems to go away for a while, and then it comes back, and it goes through these phases again. It's continually changing. It's continually seems to come into existence and go out of existence. That's that aspect of reality, moon face reality. Then there's sun face reality. Now, granted, the way we perceive it looks like the sun goes away for a while. I know this caused some great consternation for people once upon a time, and they didn't quite understand what was going on. You imagine this. Where's that thing going? And worse, is it coming back? So rites were constructed to make sure that that thing would come back. We'll make, if there was a God attached, we'll make that God happy so that the light comes back. But the light itself, the sun doesn't go through those phases like the moon does. It's just always the sun. So that's that steady aspect of reality, that which does not change. And so now you can hear in Baso's reply that he's actually addressing the nature of reality, which is there's an aspect to it that seems to come and go, that seems to always be changing. And that's the one, again, that we're all hooked into. That's the one, we see it, it's right here. So when we think about real or reality, here it is, this is the stuff. But we're overlooking something else, which is there's this aspect of this experience, this experience that does not go away, that does not change, that's right here. And we go, well, what would that be? But it's just right here. It's right now. And we overlook that. In fact, it's such a, I don't know how to put it. I'm thinking about now, the term now, which is just a way to talk about this aspect of reality. It's always now, always thus, always here. But when we talk about always now, that's one of those things that sounds dumb. I saw a movie a number of years ago now called Boyhood, and maybe you saw it. It was a film that the filmmaker took like, I don't know, about a dozen years to film, maybe even longer. And it follows a boy. This is why I think it's about a dozen years, because I think he follows him from the age of 6 until he's 18. And they actually use the same actor. So the filmmaker filmed stuff when the kid was 6 and 7 and 8 every year. Just went and filmed scenes in this movie for a dozen years. There's that changing aspect. And then the young man goes to college. He meets an attractive young woman. He's interested in her. They go for a walk and they take some psychedelic mushrooms. And this is where it gets kind of dumb because, he's like, one thing that I have really come to realize is that it's always now. And I remember when he said that, the whole theater just burst out laughing, because it's such a, in a way, such a dumb thing to say. Of course, it's always now. But you know what? We overlook that all the time. We overlook that all the time. Again, caught up in the particular way that reality shows up to us. And it shows up to us in a way that there seems to be a past, a present, a future. They all seem to be separate things. And then here we are, and it's always now. But it is always now. And yet there does seem to be a past, a present, and a future. Those things seem to show up. This is what Basso's pointing to. Of course, this is, Steve has given plenty of talks. I'm not giving a big reveal to say this is the two truths. You're all sitting there going, yeah, he's talking about the two truths. But this is the nature of reality. The nature of reality is sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha. It is the world of particularity, of things that seem to come and go, the impermanent, changing world. And then there's this aspect that is unchanging, which is just, again, that's the thing I can't, which is gesture. Because if I say it, it's not right. It's like when I was writing a paper in graduate school and I was trying to pin down when now was. And I realized that every time I articulated it, sounds like something a graduate student would do, doesn't it? Every time I tried to articulate it, it'd be gone. And I was like, okay, so therefore, thus, my conclusion is there is no now because you can't articulate it, which is ridiculous because we know it's right here. And we know that we're having this experience. We know this is taking place. Now, again, what we think of, we're having this experience, we're immediately thinking, well, we're sitting in a room. I'm not going to be sitting in this particular room 2 hours from now. I'm going to be on my bike, riding to St. Paul, wherever I'm going to go on a bike ride today. You might think of it that way. But there you are. Experience showing up is showing up as that bike ride, or whatever it is that's showing up as. So we get back to Basso's teaching then. This is very important, what it is he's pointing out. How's your health, teacher? Sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha. So in moon-faced Buddha, perhaps there's this aspect where he could have said, yeah, not so good. Could be better. But that just doesn't get at the full truth of what's going on. There's also just here, now. And that is Basso telling the temple superintendent, not telling him actually, just expressing the notion of what I titled this talk, which is get real. Get real. Usually when we hear something like get real, we flip it around backwards. So Basso is helping the student to see, look, there's more to reality than the way you're taking it to be. And it involves this unchanging aspect of reality. So usually when we say get real, we do the opposite. We look at, well, here a teaching and maybe it's pointing to absolute truth. And that sounds to us like some kind of ideal possibility or some weird thing, that, okay, you don't think about it, you don't talk about it. But the reality is, and then we'll point to, and usually we're going to point to, when people are doing this thing about get real, they might talk about current events. But this is going on. This stuff is going on. So you live in your fantasy world, your ideal world of absolute reality. But in the meantime, and then just point your finger. Or some people might point to something a little more personal and say, but we suffer. There's death. There's loss. There's confusion. There's real pain and suffering here. So let's get real, teacher. This is the way reality is showing up. That's the way we usually take get real. But we're still pointing to the world of appearance, and we're not taking into account that absolute reality that the teacher's pointing out to help you see that the world's not just moon-faced Buddha. You know, it's not just that aspect that's changing, but it's not just sun-faced Buddha either. So Baso doesn't go to the other extreme. He says sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha. And to me, what this helps us to see again is not that it's going to tell us what to do. So again, thinking about all the confusion that shows up in our lives. This isn't going to tell you what to do as far as, now, if you just stop doing this, everything will be okay, right? Stop saying your truth is better than somebody else's truth, just like I was going to write down. You know, don't do that. You don't have to do that. That's not what this teaching is pointing out. Instead, it's how do we live this ever-changing world in light of what does not change. Just to play on the sun and moon reference. How do we live in this ever-changing world in light of what does not change? That's what we address. That's what we live every moment of our life. And again, this is the thing that I come back to a number of times over the past year. But this is really important. There's no way that's the right way to do things. Now, in the relative world, there might be things that we see are more, I don't know, helpful than other things. I don't know. But again, whatever it is that we're taking up, whatever action or whatever truth we're going to express, and again, putting quotes around that, the kind of truth we usually do, the truth we think we can express in words, just remember that's not the whole picture. By its nature, that's limited. By its nature, it's evanescent. That is, it comes and it goes. By its nature, it is that. And we can live with that understanding that the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, is not just that world of appearances. And if we do that, I think it becomes much more difficult for us to be as obstinate, to be as, I think, arrogant as we can be, and have some humility, real humility in the face of reality. So that is the body of my talk. So if people have questions or comments, I welcome them. Let me put my headphones in here. I'm just going to put one in so I can hear folks out here as well. So, hey, that was me. I'm sorry, I'm hearing myself lagging just slightly behind my talking. So, but anyhow, so if you're on Zoom, you can ask a question. If you're in the room, same thing.
Can you hear me?
I sure can, yeah.
Okay. So my question was, Steve highlighted that there's a mistake that we can fall into where we think that the aim of our practice is to become free of desires, free of opinions, and that this is an unrealistic goal in the sense that we don't hold desires or opinions anymore. I had been arguing with some people this week on the internet, and immediately afterwards was struck by the phrase from Trusting the Heart Mind, which says, "Do not seek after truth, only cease to cherish opinions. Do not remain in the relative view of things. Avoid such pursuits carefully." And I wondered whether there are two aspects to this. The point that Steve is making, that, as it were, in terms of our understanding, we're not trying to become creatures that don't have desires or opinions, but also with this advice, avoid such pursuits carefully, that there are some activities we can engage in which will incline us too strongly towards building our lives around desires and opinions, and that as a matter of practice, that goal of holding fewer desires and opinions might be a realistic part of our practice, that we don't go on the internet and argue with strangers every single day, for example, because it doesn't train us to approach the world in a beneficial and whole regarding way.
Right. So again, what the teachings do is they point to reality and the nature of reality. Whether we need to train for that, probably not, because here it is. What we do want to do is just keep coming back to now, and when we act, when we move forward. And so perhaps the way we can think about it is, if we're in the habit of just sort of acting out of our fragmented ways of seeing, and that's just what we do, it probably is difficult for us to see what's actually taking place. But I'm hesitant to use the word habit, but as we start to settle in, as we start to settle our minds, coming back to now and seeing reality and seeing what it is that's going on when we get engaged in these conversations. That's what we can do, is just to settle down and be with this moment. Now I say that saying that I don't always do that, right? So the goal is not to be like that 100% of the time. Right? Our practice is not to be like that 100% of the time, but rather just to live each moment as it arises. And the moment may arise as confusion. That's just the nature of the way the moment is showing up. And the next moment can arise as seeing, as clarity. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I was saying about the teachings, is that rather than seeing them as tools or techniques that we use to try to bring about some kind of result, that they're really just, the practice is just to bring us back to realizing the nature of reality. And we can do that in each moment. And we can step astray of that, so to speak, where we find ourselves caught up in our thoughts. And then we can see that we're doing that again. And that's what we do. And we do it to the best of our ability. Right? So if we're really, no matter what it is we're doing in life, when we step into this world, we're doing the best that we can, even if we're not trying so hard, but regardless, whatever it is, we're acting from our understanding at that moment. And so that's what we can do, is the best that we can do in each moment. And I think if you're really aware of that, if you're really stepping forward wholeheartedly, that's not such a bad thing. So I don't know if that helps answer your question.
Thank you. Yes.
So, David is just pointing out that one of the things he liked about the koan was that the moon reflects the light of the sun, right? That's what it is. And that aspect, the way that resonates in the koan, speaks to you. And there was the Sylvia Plath part that I missed, though. She has a line that's kind of about that.
The last one she wrote before she did her life.
No.
Is a line that quotes, the moon is seen all this before. And essentially, as I said, her flax crack open the thread.
Oh. I've heard that phrase. A songwriter I know stole it and put it into a song. Right. So absolutely, I agree that the koan is rich, and I like what you pointed out. So thanks for sharing. Yeah, Mary.
To the extent that I understood what the question I was asking, it's a complex question.
Yeah.
I was struck by when Steve was teaching the precepts class, he said the precepts, as laid out by, I'm making this for you, as laid out by, it's called Dharma, self-nature, that they're impossible to live in this world. They're impossible. It's impossible not to utter a single word and observe the precept of not speaking falsely, and in particular, the precept, the 9-point self-interest, very obvious. Within the selfless dharma, not measuring self, is called the precept of not giving way to anger. Impossible not to give way to anger. But then it says, follow the way does not harbor ill will. That's something we can live with. That's something that we can let go of ill will. I know the speaker is getting at that in a certain way. There's and the moon-based Buddha also to me represents that aspect of reality that allows us to live. And as you said, an unchanging reality that the Dharma points to in his self-nature's clear and obvious. And we realize justice. Anyway.
Thanks for sharing. Right. So as if I understand, again, it's moon-faced Buddha, it's sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha. So we're in this world of ever-changing phenomenon. And yeah, I don't know if I missed that aspect. I could have, because I was trying to remember his question to be able to restate it. And I was kind of starting to panic because I knew I wasn't going to be able to do that. Yeah, there is this aspect of reality that's always changing, right? So that means that in the next moment, we don't have to be caught up in confusion. Is that what you're pointing out? That changing aspect of reality? In the second part where you were talking about how it gives you hope or something like that.
No, I didn't say hope.
Yeah, I know you didn't. That's why I can't.
I've given up hope.
Hope actually is something that's not so bad to let that be still.
Close me in ways no, I just meant that there are ways to live with, there are ways to, the two truths point to ways that you can actually live in this world while acknowledging that there is, not acknowledging, I don't know how to put it, that there is an unchanging aspect, that the unchanging aspect of reality is the universal, the aspect of symmetry that Steve talks about.
Yeah, but it's not losing hold of either.
Is symmetry.
Yeah. Yeah. So not losing hold of either. It's not a talk like this, perhaps. I'm hoping I didn't step there, but sometimes it can sound like, there's a dismissal of what we normally, when we say get real, of that world. And it's not that at all. That's the world that's showing up. That's the world we engage in. That's the world we have to act in. And we have to make particular decisions, and we have to have ways to make those particular decisions. And we have to live, that world and that life. But we don't have to live it in the way that we do, which is just caught up in that stuff. But we can live it in light of, that which is unchanging. So I think that's kind of what you're gesturing to too. And if the question was asking that, then good. Yeah. Yeah. Because once, I will say that once that came out of there, I couldn't hear a word because of my hearing issues. It was just a big blob. So we're over 11 by a bit. I appreciate the conversation and questions here. And again, I appreciate you being here. And, I know we don't have hundreds of people here, at the Zendo, but I would like to invite people out to the garden afterwards, and maybe the more stalwart members of the people attending here can grab a couple chairs so that people can sit down rather than just stand uncomfortably under the tree. But it's such a lovely day, and it's so nice to see everybody. And it would be great if you're interested. I'm going to pop out there for a while. And if I am there by myself, then I'll just sit out there for a while by myself, enjoy the weather, and move on with my day. So again, I want to thank you all. Thank you.